Hello, this is Alexia, Alex, May, and Mariana talking about Aguirre, the Wrath of God. We chose to focus on the scene where the Native Americans in the canoe come up to the raft with the European characters on it. In context of the movie, this is after they've already broken away from Spain and of the larger expedition and are now going forward through South America to conquer in the name of their new emperor. When you're watching the scene, try to focus on how this scene serves both as a critique of colonialism as well as a sort of example of it. So enjoy the scene.
January 24th. For the first time, we saw two Indians. They seemed to be friendly.
One of them is a woman. Yeah, see how look at us.
Pull the boat over.
I got the man. Here he is.
And I got the woman.
Look! Woman, huh? Fresh fish.
Right.
I'm trying to put an one night and pass up no cause nature. Holding pass up. I don't want to know the order. Time is a long way get you. And some chin only. Then we want is waiting. Hey, are we missing that?
So me kayo tayo pipi?
You know, you don't know what. No time.
Kayatas. Di masuk kayayas?
What's he saying?
He says he's a Yagua. It was foretold that one day the sons of the sun would come from a long way through great hardship to this land, and that they make clouds and thunder noise which they produce out of tubes. They have been waiting for the sons of the sun because here on this river God's work of creation is not yet finished.
Look at this gold. Where did he get this? Where did you get that? Where did it come from? Huh?
What the? Nature. Pass up.
Gold. Gold. Ask him where he got that. Ask him where El Dorado is. Where does this gold come from?
Manu say, Pupatay?
Harte. Intan.
Where did he say?
Macons. Noah.
Has this savage heard of our Savior, Jesus Christ, and of our true mission to save their souls?
Asokta amapuchui hatamuyo?
This is a Bible. It contains the words of God, which we are bringing to enlighten the darkness of their world.
Imanyaya kashankit ataiki?
Has he understood that in this book are stored the words of God?
Nyapis rikunichu kang wawaiki. Kaipis rikunichu.
You may hold it, my son.
Imenai kumanyaya kanki. Nyapis kuskisa sotopa. Pungkuti kol kachaka mamani. He says he does not speak.
Kill him! Kill him for his blasphemy!
So in the scene you just saw, the conflict between religion as a means of spreading colonialism comes to a head. We see the monk Gaspar actively trying to convert a native. How does the movie portray religion as a means of expansion? Alex, what do you think?
I think that colonialism is mostly an excuse to impose religion. So in the scene, by giving the Native Americans the Bible, they basically assume that the Native Americans know what to do with the Word of God, and when they don't, they're punished for it, in this case killed. And the European settlers, or colonialists, basically completely disregard the Native Americans' religion, as when they first got onto the boat, they were talking about prophecy, how they were the sons of God, and how they would come with hardship and then bring sounds of clouds and thunder. And however, they really did not care about it. They just focused on the gold and imposed their own religion. And we sort of see this in Christopher Columbus, as when he found the New World, he basically imposed the Columbus Exchange, where a lot of it was the exchange of culture and religion. And we could also see this in residential schools, as residential schools were mostly used to annex Native American religion into European culture and religion.
Do either of you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think he summed it up pretty well.
Yeah, Alex, you did a really great job. It's definitely pertinent how the first thing out of Gasper's mouth is gold, and it's not religion. It's after that he backtracks. So this goes into how the crux of the scene is when the monk Gasper orders the soldiers to kill the Native American man for disrespecting the Bible. The Native American is confused by Gasper, saying the book contains the words of God, and then brings the Bible to his ear. How does the callousness of the Europeans, especially a figure of religion, serve as a critique of colonialism? Mariana, what do you think?
All right, one more time. I think it was just very insensitive that the Europeans just expected the Native Americans to just know what to do with the Bible when they were first being handed to them, and like James Ramey was saying in his article or critique of this movie, he was mentioning that the dialogue was mostly false because they speak very two languages. I mean, the Europeans' assumption that both of those native people speak the same language was just insensitive in itself. So it just adds on to the reason why they didn't know what to do with the Bible. I mean, if they really wanted the Native Americans to convert, or trying to convert them, they would try to help them understand rather than expect them to know what to do, you know? So, yeah, that's all I have to say for that part.
Yeah. May, what do you think? Do you have anything to add?
I really want to touch on how this movie is like a critique of colonialism also, where the scene where the men opened fire on the raft, which caused like a huge casualty for the group.
Yeah.
I can relate this back to like Montage of Cannibal's essay, where he talks about this idea of how Europeans regard Native Americans as inferior and barbaric to modern civilization. So to the colonists, like watching men slay one another horribly and then giving them a proper burial is considered humane. This stood out for me because like they look down on the natives as barbaric, when in contrast, like these civilized men rape their village and like cause bloodshed and destruction in the process. So to sum it up, like in colonialism, colonists like consider themselves superior to the natives. They see everything that is not like in their common practice, like no matter how gory and gruesome, is barbaric. In the end, I think this movie is critiquing colonialism, where it shows how barbaric and just how bloodthirsty the colonists are when craving for power and authority, even if it means to like eat a man alive, including Monty.
Yeah, I definitely think that, at least in the scene, you can see how it is critiquing colonialism, how it almost treats it as irony that you're hiding behind a mask of religion instead of religion being the reason they're doing this. Clearly, if he just decides to kill the guy, then religion isn't the main focus. It's more just a sort of shield to hide behind for their real motives, which seem to be greed or just this lust for power. Besides looking at it as a critique, we can also choose to look at it as almost an example of colonialism. Despite negatively portraying the treatment of Native Americans, the director simultaneously does what he criticizes. The shirtless woman in the scene is treated as a joke in the way that the cinematography is, and this is the only time a Native American is killed on screen, despite the extensive focus of the death of Europeans, and the fact that the death of Native Americans is one of the largest sins of imperialism. How does this scene demonstrate the director's thoughtless treatment of the Native Americans' practices and the characters themselves? May, what do you think?
I think like the director does this through his cinematography. So it is ignorant in a sense that we only got like a glimpse of the natives, and in that specific scene they were stereotyped and did not receive any like fair representation. Like the scene flashes the woman's bare chest and almost made fun of her nakedness and like vulnerability. As for the man, the director tries to make the native as barbaric as possible, which gives us no insights into their culture apart from them just being uncivilized cannibals. So through this poor representation, I feel like we are driven towards thinking that they're the weak ones who are completely vulnerable to the colonists' exploitation and malicious intent.
Do either of you have something to add to that?
I feel like I also saw that a little bit in the scene as as you said, in basically the Native Americans' costumes, they're very bare, and it's it wasn't really well made. How the hat of the man had just straw or hay in it, and it's it really portrayed them as very primitive and very savage-like, and it's even in the scene, the Europeans even called them savages for just speaking a different language. And it's also in James Ramey, he also mentions that in the scene the two people actually don't even speak the same language, which is really culturally insensitive, as he sort of just expects that, oh, they're both Native Americans, so they just speak the same language, and it's really insensitive on how it's two completely different languages. Relating back to Montaigne of Cannibals, there's this quote that it says they're savages at the same rate that we say fruits are wild. So it's they're very uncivilized in the wild, and it's untamed.
Yeah, I definitely think that both of you mentioned James Rainey's quote, and it's true, because it's definitely comes from a place of ignorance, and that the two people have to fabricate a conversation that doesn't really exist, because they wouldn't speak the same language, because not all Native Americans speak the same language. Even though you see these bad things happen to the Native Americans, which shows it's a critique, and the same way you see these examples of the Native Americans almost being used as props. Their characters aren't treated to the same, they're not given the same levity as the characters of the Europeans are. All of their deaths, this is the only scene, like I mentioned, that a Native American is killed on screen. Otherwise, it all happens off screen, whether it be the prince, who has a decent role, he has a decent speaking part, he has his own monologue at a point, and he's not even given the courtesy of being shown to die on screen like all the Europeans are, whether it be the guy who gets beheaded, or the guy who just gets stabbed and is oh, I thought it would hurt more. It's just, they're given random deaths that the Native Americans just aren't given the same character towards. And I think that the reason behind this, when we look at that, we could probably look back at the Howard French lecture, and when he is talking about these prison industrial labor camps, or plantations as we call them, he says that the reason that they're not focused on when we look at imperialism is because they're ugly and it's hard to look at, and you want to see great successes coming from great actions. So even if you look at the South and you go down to some attractions, you're gonna see plantation houses being shown as these gorgeous things that came out of slavery, when the focus shouldn't be that. It should be the slavery that was a result of imperialism. Bringing it back to the movie, it's hard to look at the Native Americans and what happened to them as awful as it is. Even though the director shows bad things happening to them, he doesn't necessarily humanize the Native Americans themselves, and it's just, they're also seen as barbaric, and he displays them like this even though there's such a deeper, richer culture that he chooses to neglect. He definitely dehumanizes him by doing this. Do you guys have anything to add?
You summed it up pretty well.
Perfect. I think that's good, and I hope you guys enjoyed, and
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.